Welcome to WikiPodcast. Today kicks off a new mini-series we're calling Elementary Thought, and this first chapter is a deep dive into the very essence of philosophy, drawing from the Wikipedia article on the subject.
Mhm.
Think of this as your foundational exploration, into understanding the big questions about existence, knowledge, ethics, that sort of thing.
Yeah, they're really big stuff.
Exactly. Our goal is to extract the core insights, make this huge field feel a bit more accessible, and maybe hopefully spark some real aha moments for you.
Sounds good. So where do we start? Maybe with the word itself. Philosophy.
Good idea.
It has a really lovely origin in ancient Greek, philos, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom.
Love of wisdom. Simple but powerful.
It really is. It makes you think about that fundamental human drive to understand, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And this love of wisdom has quite a history. The article mentions Pythagoras possibly coining the term, though it says that's a bit uncertain.
Right. The origins can be murky. But what is clear is how broad philosophy used to be. That's fascinating.
Yeah, tell me about it. When it first popped up in English, around the late 12th century, it covered pretty much everything, all rational thought.
Absolutely everything, including what we now call natural science. I mean, think about Newton's big work.
The Principia Mathematica.
Exactly. The full title translates to Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Exploring nature was philosophy back then.
Wow, so philosophy was this huge umbrella for intellectual activity.
Mm-hmm.
And then it sounds like over time, it kind of sharpened its focus, zeroing in on those really core questions.
That's a good way to put it. Sharpened its focus on things like reality, that's metaphysics knowledge, which is epistemology, and values, ethics.
Okay, so what defines philosophy in that more focused sense? The article says it's a rational and critical inquiry.
Yes, rational and critical. It's not just, having opinions. It's systematic. It thinks about its own methods, its own assumptions, really wrestling with those big, enduring human questions.
And it's not always about getting straightforward answers, is it? Seems more about the journey.
Very much so. It's about better understanding, examining life, maybe dispelling some confusion, getting past our own prejudices.
Like Socrates saying, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Precisely. Or Bertrand Russell's point that philosophy stops us being trapped by sort of common sense assumptions. It frees up your thinking.
So it's this method for questioning everything, really. Ourselves, the world, fundamentally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, within academia, how do philosophers actually define philosophy? The article hints this is, tricky.
It's very tricky. There's even a whole field, metaphilosophy, that just tries to figure out what philosophy is.
Seriously, a philosophy?
Kind of, yeah. Some try to find essential features, others see it more like a family of related questions. The problem is definitions often end up too wide, including things that aren't philosophy or too narrow, leaving important bits out.
I can see that. And the relationship with science. That's complex, too. The article mentions some people, like Quine, seeing philosophy as a kind of science itself. Very abstract, but still empirical.
Yeah, that's one view. That philosophy looks at the biggest, most general patterns in our experience. Still tied to the world, but, from a very high altitude.
But then philosophical progress looks so different from scientific progress, doesn't it?
That's the counter-argument, exactly. Which leads to other ideas, like maybe philosophy is a sort of incubator, a midwife for sciences.
How so?
Well, the idea is that as certain philosophical questions get clearer, develop specific methods, they kind of spin off and become their own sciences. Physics, psychology, linguistics. Many started under the philosophy umbrella.
That makes a lot of sense historically, but there are other views too, right? Emphasizing the differences.
Definitely. Some argue philosophy is fundamentally about meaning, understanding concepts, clarifying language. Wittgenstein, for example, thought many philosophical problems were actually language traps.
So philosophy is linguistic therapy, fixing misunderstandings.
In a way, yes. Thinking about thinking, you could say. Then you've got phenomenology, seeing philosophy as a rigorous science, but one that studies experience itself, by trying to suspend all our usual assumptions.
Suspend assumptions. That sounds hard.
It is. And we can't forget the ancient view, especially the Stoics. For them, philosophy wasn't just academic. It was a practical way of life, a spiritual practice almost, developing reason for well-being.
So many different angles on what it even is.
Exactly. It's evolved hugely.
Okay, let's dive into that evolution then, the history. The article talks about it being a systematic chronological look at concepts and doctrines, but it's more than just dates and names.
Oh, much more. It's intellectual history, sure, but with a critical eye.
Yeah.
It asks, Were these past ideas true? Are they still relevant? How good were the arguments?
So it's an active engagement with the past.
Precisely. And while it mainly focuses on rational arguments, some historians also look at how myths or religious ideas played a role.
The article points out several big traditions: Western, Arabic, Persian, Indian, Chinese. Let's start with Western philosophy. Ancient Greece, 6th century BCE.
Yeah, the pre-Socratics.
Yeah.
What's key there is the shift, trying to explain the cosmos using reason, not just myths about gods.
Laying the groundwork.
For the giants, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they just blew the doors open, tackling ethics, knowledge, reality, the mind. Their impact is hard to overstate.
And after them came other schools like Stoicism, skepticism, then the medieval period where philosophy got deeply connected with religion.
Yes, particularly using Greek philosophy like Aristotle's ideas to explain and defend Christian theology. It shows how philosophy always interacts with the culture around it.
Right. And then the Renaissance, a rebirth of interest in those classical Greek and Roman ideas. Humanism.
Exactly, a big shift, which led into the modern period starting around the 17th century. A huge focus then on how we know things. Reason, experience, science, and philosophy were closely linked.
And that's when the Enlightenment happened, challenging traditions.
Followed by the 19th century with big systems like German idealism, Marxism. Then the 20th century, a real explosion. Formal logic, focus on language, pragmatism, continental philosophy like existentialism. Plus, thankfully, more women joining the field, though still underrepresented.
Okay, quite a sweep for Western thought. Now, Arabic Persian philosophy. The article says 9th century CE, influenced by the Greeks, responding to Islamic theology.
That's right. What's fascinating is how thinkers like Al-Kindi and Avicenna took Aristotle and Neoplatonism and used those tools to interpret the Quran, building really sophisticated systems that tried to harmonize reason and faith.
But not everyone agreed. Al-Ghazali was more critical of reason.
Yes, he questioned whether reason alone could grasp ultimate reality or God. It shows the internal debates within the tradition. Later figures like Mullah Sadr were also hugely influential. And more recently, Islamic modernism has wrestled with how Islamic beliefs fit with modernity.
So again, that dialogue between tradition and new ideas. Let's shift to India. The article describes Indian philosophy as integrating reality, knowledge, and spiritual enlightenment, going way back to the Vedas, maybe 900 BCE.
Yeah, that integration is key. It's often not just intellectual curiosity, but tied to a path towards liberation or enlightenment. The Vedas ask those deep questions about the self, reality, rebirth.
And then came traditions like Buddhism and Jainism.
Right. Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, challenging the idea of a permanent self and focusing on ending suffering. Jainism, emphasizing nonviolence. Then the classical period of Hinduism brought the 6 orthodox schools.
Like Vedanta, with Shankara saying everything is ultimately one, and Ramanuja offering a different view.
Exactly. Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, ultimate non-duality. Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita, unity, but with real distinctions within it. And the Bhakti movement, emphasizing devotion. Lots of diversity there.
And in modern times, interaction with Western thought. Figures like Vivekananda trying to synthesize things.
Yes, presenting Indian thought to the world, arguing for the validity of different paths.
Okay, finally, Chinese philosophy. The article says it's often very practical. Social conduct, government, self-cultivation.
Very much so, especially early on. The 6th century BCE was crucial there too. You get Confucianism, focused on moral virtue and social harmony.
Confucius.
And Taoism, associated with Laozi, emphasizing harmony with nature, the Tao, this sort of underlying principle of the universe.
Different approaches.
Very. And you also had Mohism, legalism. Later, Buddhism arrived and blended in. Then Neo-Confucianism tried to give Confucian ethics a stronger metaphysical basis.
And more recently, engagement with the right, Marxism, and efforts to modernize Confucianism itself.
That's the pattern. And the article briefly mentions other rich traditions too, Japanese, Latin American, African philosophy, each with its own unique history and focus, showing just how diverse this love of wisdom really is.
It's a vast landscape. Okay, let's try to get a handle on the core branches within philosophy. Epistemology, ethics, logic, metaphysics seem central.
They are generally considered the big four, yeah.
So epistemology. Theory of knowledge. What is knowledge? How do we get it? What are its limits?
Exactly. It tackles huge questions. What does it even mean to know something? How can we be sure? Justification, belief, truth, rationality. It's all in there.
The article mentions different kinds of knowledge, too, like knowing facts versus knowing how to do something.
Right. Declarative knowledge versus practical knowledge, or know-how. And knowing people or places, knowledge by acquaintance, Then there's the classic analysis, knowledge as justified true belief. But that's controversial.
The Gettier problem.
That's the one. Cases where you seem to have a justified true belief, but it feels like you don't really know. It throws a wrench in the works.
And where does knowledge come from? Experience versus reason.
The classic empiricism versus rationalism debate. Plus, how do we avoid an infinite regress of justifications? Foundationalism, coherentism, different answers. And looming over it all is skepticism. Can we know anything for sure?
Big questions indeed. Okay, next up, ethics. Moral philosophy.
Right and wrong. Good and bad. How should we live? What makes an action right? What makes a person good? What about institutions?
It seems to cover a lot. The meaning of life, even.
Potentially, yes. It breaks down into areas. Meta-ethics looks at the nature of morality itself. Are moral truths objective? What do words like good even mean?
And normative ethics.
That's about developing general theories of right action. Consequentialism says focus on the outcomes. Deontology says follow the rules or duties. Virtue ethics says focus on developing good character.
So different frameworks for deciding what to do.
Exactly. And then applied ethics takes these theories and applies them to specific real-world issues, bioethics, environmental ethics, business ethics.
Makes sense. Then there's logic, the study of reasoning.
Correct reasoning, yes. How to tell a good argument from a bad one. It's the philosopher's toolkit in many ways.
Formal versus informal logic. What's the difference there?
Formal logic uses artificial languages, focuses purely on the structure of arguments. Like, if P, then Q, P, therefore Q, that structure is valid, regardless of what P and Q are like. Informal logic looks at arguments in natural language, considering context, content, potential fallacies that aren't just about structure.
Okay, and deductive versus non-deductive arguments.
Deductive arguments aim for certainty. If the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Non-deductive arguments like induction or abduction, finding the best explanation, give strong reasons, but don't guarantee the conclusion. They're more about probability or likelihood.
And fallacies are just bad arguments.
Errors in reasoning, yeah. They can be formal, a structural mistake, or informal, like an irrelevant appeal to emotion. Logic helps to spot them.
Got it. Finally, the fourth core branch, metaphysics.
Ah, metaphysics, the really big picture stuff, the most general features of reality. Existence itself. Objects, properties, space, time, cause and effect. It can be. It asks questions like, what kinds of things fundamentally exist? What does it mean to be? That's ontology.
Yeah.
It also includes philosophical cosmology, the nature of the universe as a whole.
And questions about reality, physical versus mental.
Exactly. Are only physical things real? What about minds, numbers, abstract concepts? Then there's the problem of identity, what makes something the same thing over time, even if it changes. Essential versus accidental properties.
Yeah.
And the classic free will versus determinism debate.
Wow, that covers a lot of ground. And the article mentions other major branches too.
Oh yes. Aesthetics, philosophy of beauty and art, philosophy of language, meaning truth, how language relates to thought, philosophy of mind consciousness, the mind-body problem.
The mind-body problem, that sounds like a big one.
Huge. Materialism, dualism, functionalism, trying to figure out how mental states relate to physical brain states. The hard problem of consciousness, why does physical processing feel like anything at all?
Right, and philosophy of religion, science, political philosophy, applying that philosophical lens to specific areas.
Precisely. Each takes philosophical methods to analyze the core concepts, assumptions, and arguments within those domains. Like, philosophy of science asks, what makes something scientific? How does science explain things? Political philosophy asks, what justifies government power? What is justice?
Okay, so we have the branches. But how do philosophers actually do this stuff? What are the methods? It's not like running experiments in a lab.
Generally, no, though some areas interact with empirical findings. But yeah, the methods are often different. Conceptual analysis is a big one. Really clarifying what we mean by key terms like knowledge or justice or consciousness.
Just breaking down the concepts.
Analyzing them, exploring their implications, seeing how they fit together. Philosophers also often start with common sense beliefs or intuitions, things we generally accept as true, and then examining if they hold up.
And looking at language?
Analyzing ordinary language, yes. How we actually use words in everyday life can reveal underlying assumptions or distinctions.
Yeah.
Sometimes philosophical puzzles arise just from misusing language.
What about thought experiments like the trolley problem?
Ah, yes, a classic tool. Imagining hypothetical scenarios to test intuitions, explore the consequences of theories, isolate variables in a way you can't in real life. They force you to confront your principles.
So you use your intuition in those scenarios?
Intuitions play a role, yes. those immediate, non-inferential judgments or impressions. But then there's the method of reflective equilibrium, trying to get your specific intuitions and your general principles into a coherent balance, maybe adjusting both along the way.
Okay. Other methods mentioned were pragmatism.
Right, focusing on the practical consequences of beliefs to determine their truth or value. Phenomenology uses reduction bracketing assumptions to describe experience itself. And methodological naturalism emphasizes using methods similar to the natural sciences where possible.
So a whole range of tools.
Definitely. And philosophers often disagree about which methods are best, which can lead to different approaches and conclusions.
Right. Now, how does all this philosophy connect to other fields? The article calls it a meta-discipline. What does that mean?
It means philosophy can step back and look at the foundations, methods, and limits of other disciplines: science, math, law, art, journalism. Philosophy can analyze their core concepts, assumptions, and the nature of knowledge within those fields.
So it provides a kind of critical oversight.
Or a foundational inquiry, yeah. It asks questions like, what counts as good evidence in science? What is the nature of legal proof? What is artistic value? What does journalistic objectivity mean? Historically, remember, many sciences started within philosophy.
Right, the midwife idea again.
Exactly. It bridges disciplines, analyzes shared concepts.
And it has practical influence, too. Bioethics was mentioned.
Absolutely. Huge impact there. Questions about personhood, abortion, animal rights, genetic engineering. Philosophers contribute directly to those debates. Same with business ethics. Professional ethics applying moral reasoning to practical conduct.
And impacting how we think about belief and evidence in general.
Definitely. Philosophy of science influences how scientists think about theory and observation. Legal philosophy affects ideas about evidence and justice. Philosophy of religion examines the rationality of religious claims. It shapes how we evaluate arguments and evidence across the board.
Its influence seems quite broad, then, reaching into logic for math and computer science, psychology, politics.
Yes, the skills of critical thinking, logical analysis, clear argumentation, they're transferable. And philosophical ideas have directly shaped history. Think of the Enlightenment's impact on democracy, or Marxism's influence on revolutions, or Gandhi's philosophy on India's independence.
And it plays a cultural role, too, challenging norms, like with feminism.
For sure. Feminist philosophy has been crucial in analyzing concepts like gender, power, justice, equality, really pushing society to re-examine assumptions. Philosophy often plays that critical, questioning role in culture.
Of course, the article notes some criticisms that philosophy might be too self-contained and not useful enough practically.
That criticism is definitely out there. Is philosophy mainly valuable for its own sake, or does it need to demonstrate external contributions? It's an ongoing debate about the value of fundamental inquiry versus immediate application.
It's a lot to think about. So what does this all mean? Hopefully this deep dive into the foundations of philosophy, kicking off our Elementary Thought miniseries, has given you a clearer picture of its scope and its importance.
From reality itself to how we know things, how we should act, even how we reason, philosophy gives us tools to explore the really fundamental stuff.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Thinking about that lasting impact, how these abstract ideas have shaped science, politics, how we even see ourselves.
Absolutely. And maybe thinking about which branch we touched on really sparks your curiosity. What big questions feel most pressing to you as we go forward in this series?
Yeah, that's a great point. And this raises an important question for you, the listener. How might understanding these basic philosophical ideas change how you approach information or knowledge or just the big questions in your own life? Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for listening. Write to us in the comments what other topics you would like us to talk about, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you, and have an amazing day.